Hey everybody, episode 3 here. It's Todd Caputo with Tom Kline. Tom is a very interesting guy. He has this company called Better Vantage Point that he's going to talk to us about today. But Tom, before we start talking about your product, right? How did you and I meet? Where did we meet? Did we meet at a soda? Where did we meet?
It was either a SO2 or AIS. I don't remember which one.
I think you know what? Actually, it was AIS.
And
It was AIS.
and an ADA and a
Yeah.
SO2 and
Yeah, but I think we met first at AIS because you came to one of the things that I spoke at, I think, and then we talked after. And refresh my memory, right? You and I spoke the first time, and then you told me, I believe, you used to be a car dealer, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that, and tell the audience about your experience as a dealer first, because that's super important, obviously, for the people that are the audience here.
Sure. My family's been next year. My family been in the car business 100 years. So we started in 1925. So I'm a third generation car guy. It's in my blood. I can't help it. I was at the stores for about 30 years, and we sold our stores in 2019, and that's when I opened my consulting business.
But you sold in 2019, but like you said, you're 100 years. Like, I want to hear more about that, right? Like, where did it all start? Who started it? Like, what part of the country? That's interesting.
Yeah, my grandfather started in 1925. He was a Chevrolet dealer. And then my uncle and my father started working for him in 1964, and that was in Norfolk, Virginia.
Okay.
In 1964, an opportunity came up in what was then Princess Anne County, which was just a little county of 5,000 people. And my father said to his father and his brother, "Are you interested in this?" And they said, "No, you're crazy. We're not doing that." And he said, "I'm out of here." Well, Princess Anne County then became the city of Virginia Beach, which is now the largest city in Virginia. And as the area grew and interstates went in and roads went in, they actually became competitors. So my father was competing with my grandfather and my uncle.
Oh, that must have been interesting.
Family gatherings were interesting.
Were any violence or no? Were you fist fighting over customers or market share?
No fist fighting, but other things ensued. As I announced, I was a young guy when all that happened, of course, but and so they were competitors. And
what was the franchises?
Both Chevrolet franchises.
Okay.
How it started out. And then when my grandfather died, my uncle bought that business from him. When my uncle died, Dennis Elmer started Priority, and he just sold that whole group to Lithia.
Yeah.
And Dennis Elmer actually bought the corporation from my uncle's estate because it was Priority Chevrolet doing business as Kline Motor Company.
Okay.
Or Kline Sales Company. But the name of that organization was Kline Chevrolet, and my father's store was RK Chevrolet, which is still around under obviously the new owners. They kept the name.
So, what did you like? When did you get involved in the business? Like working at the store? What did you do?
1991. I did most jobs at the store. I sold cars. I sold parts door to door for a year. We had a large parts operation, so I sold parts. I worked in the body shop. I worked in the service department, and as time went on, there was a clear need for somebody to kind of handle all the problems, and so.
Of course, car dealership. There's
So,
always problems.
so everybody got used to saying, "Hey, if there's a problem, go see Tom."
Yeah.
So as time went on, I handled all the problems, and the way that evolved is that I started saying, "Okay, well, what do we need to do to prevent these problems? Like, this is not fun every day, being in the muck solving these problems." And so the risk mitigation piece of what I do, that's where that started. Is okay. What kind of policies or procedures can we put in place to stop these things from happening? And then if we do have a problem, what kind of insurance can we buy, and how can we make sure that if we do have a big problem, we can turn it over to the insurance company and be indemnified from whatever the problem was. And so over a 20-year period, I handled all the problems. It includes class action lawsuits and all kinds of things that needed to be resolved. And so, I learned how to be creative and get those problems handled. And there's a notion in loss, in when you have a loss that you're going to take, that your first loss is your best loss, Todd.
Absolutely.
And so how to maneuver and how to maneuver the lawyers as the chief legal officer, how to make sure that the lawyers were doing what I needed them to do to kind of get the plaintiff in a position that I could sit down with them in person and get the problem handled very quickly. And whether there was insurance or not was, what I determined whether to disclose there was insurance or not. The customer didn't always know whether the insurance company was involved. I got the insurance companies to give me the authority to get them settled. So that's how I worked in the store, and that's what I did for the better part of my career there.
Did you go to college for this, like a law degree or anything like that, or no? Did you all self-taught?
It's all self-taught. I went to college, and I was a theater major, which served me well in the car business.
Absolutely. You're a theater major?
I was a theater major.
Really?
I worked in the professional theater for a number of years before I went back to the car business.
Really?
Yep.
Interesting. Well, that explains your style then, I think, right? Every time I see you, you're always you always got some fancy shirt on or some fancy, you got style. Now I get it, right? So I never knew this about you. That's why I'm glad we're doing this. So that's great. So,
yeah.
So you get to 2019, your family decides to sell. Right. You get out of the business, and obviously you can't get away from it like I can't get away from it, right? So tell me the idea, what made you decide to continue to keep working, number one, because I'm guessing you do this as a labor of love more than anything else in the car business. I'm guessing you were probably made some money when you sold your stores. Why are you doing this?
Yeah, I enjoy it is the reason. And I have a special needs son, and so he needs providing for, and so here I am, I continue to work. But I love doing what I'm doing because I'm able to really see the results of the change management that I put in. There are a lot of stores that have compliance software, but there's nobody championing it. There's nobody using it. They're paying a lot of money for it. And so one of the things I come in and do using kind of software as a backbone for what I do is change management. And I've kind of changed my definition, Todd, of what compliance is, because compliance kind of has nobody wants to comply with anything, right? Not when your wife tells you to comply, not when your boss tells you to comply. Nobody wants to comply. So I've changed my paradigm, changed that a little bit. And all compliance is, when you think about it, and all businesses have compliance, is someone has to do something at some point in time, and then periodically they have to do the same function, right? Someone has to do a thing at some point in time. That might be a Monday morning sales meeting. If you're a salesman, you're required to comply and go to that sales meeting. And so when you're setting up a compliance program at a dealership and you're analyzing the risk, you want to make that process as simple as you can and have it be repeatable, and so that everybody isn't doing rote work when it's not necessary. And so there are software programs out there that will help you do that and set up those repeatable tasks so that you don't have to. I have an auto group who wants to use this software, for example, because of their 16 stores, they can't get their managers to send the doc sheet in every morning, right? So I said, look, here's how you do. You set it up. You make sure that every night at 8 o'clock they get dinged. They say, don't forget to upload your doc sheet. 8 a.m. the next thing, and if they haven't done it by 10 a.m., then you can log in and see who it is and call them instead of spreadsheets back and forth and email, phone calls, and all that wasted time. And so So I really like the changing, changing organizations and helping them to kind of move their practice in a different direction. And ultimately, my job is to cover the dealer's ass and make sure that he's got enough insurance, that he's got the right kinds of insurance. So we're always negotiating with insurance companies and making sure they have the right coverages. And if a regulator comes in or a lawyer sues, that you have the backbone to be able to say, here, if you want to come look, come look. There's plenty to see, and we'll show you what our compliance activities are, and we'll show you why this was an anomaly, whatever the the thing that they're asking you for.
I remember when, I had 4 dealerships, right? And
Right.
I remember when it was time for the renewal, right? It's time for the renewal. I would get together with my CFO, Vinny, and he's super, super sharp. And, he would go through the policy like page by page and then kind of give me his opinion on what he thought we needed or did not need. We analyzed the cost. But one of the things to me that was always very frustrating was the fact that, and I don't know if this was by design from the insurance companies or not, but it was always like a last minute thing, right? Like, now, are you doing this last minute just to force me to sign, or are you doing it last minute because you're just so busy? But to me, if I'm looking at my garage liability policy and any other insurance I have for my stores, like this shouldn't be done. That's something that's got to be done in like a few days. Like this has got to be a process. I would think that it's at least 30 to 60 days where you're going through and you're really looking page by page at your policy, making sure you have the coverage, looking at what your losses were in the past, right? And in a lot of cases, my father always taught me this. And my father was a very good dealer. He's like, you know what? You're better off over-insuring than under-insuring for sure, right? And I totally agree with that. But I was always frustrated with the process from the insurance companies in general. And I felt like it was just always rushed, like kind of towards at the end. And what I'm finding now too, especially with some of the dealer clients that I have now, and I'll tell you where they're having some real issues. They're having issues with cars that are getting stolen, Hellcats, Corvettes, these sports cars, the Kias, like these Kias have been like a nightmare, right? These Kias and Hyundais have been a nightmare that a lot of them are going to almost like in some cases have to self-insure because a lot of the insurance companies, the carriers don't want to cover it anymore. So, walk me through this. Like a dealer finds out about you for some reason, whether it's a single point store in, the middle of nowhere, or it's a large group. Like, tell me what you do. Walk me through your process.
Sure. So I'm going to first address your direct questions on insurance. So I think that happens for 2 reasons and happens all the time. And I'm going to give everybody, all your listeners, a solution this morning for the problem. So it happens for 2 reasons, in my opinion. Number one, everybody works their pay plan. So insurance agents are paid on commission for the most part. Occasionally you'll find a dealership group that pays them on a consulting fee. But when you're paid on commission, you want to bring it in at the last minute, because then there's not much maneuvering room that can be done by the dealer. So they're just kind of left with, okay, and off it goes, and they're frustrated and aggravated. And I won't tell you what a lot of them say to me because this is going out over the airwaves, but it's a terrible process. The insurance companies too give it last minute for the same reason, because they know if they give it earlier that you're going to compare their rates.
Yeah, you got time to shop it.
You got time to shop it. So I advocate 2 things for my dealers. Number one, all quotes should be in 60 days ahead of time, or you just tell the insurance company, I'm not going to consider it. That's number one. But alongside that, and really important, Todd, is that most dealers, I would say, have all of their renewals on the same date. And the human mind can't conceive of that many details and that many negotiating points at once. And so one of the things I do is I spread out the renewal dates throughout the year so that everything is done calmly and quietly and 60 days ahead of time, and you're not crunched and you don't have to rush. And so each of those pieces, and some are naturally together, like some people like the garage package to go with the physical damage. Okay. Yeah. But if you've got cyber, you have pollution, you have D&O, you have your umbrellas, you spread these things out and the insurance agents don't like it because it's more work for them, but who's working for who? And so this is one of the first things I do is spread out the dates, look at the coverages, and see where the dealer's exposed. The first thing I do is an exercise, and I'm sure you'll resonate with this, is I say, let's do a math equation. You don't have to tell me the answer if you don't want to, but take your land and building, take your used car inventory that's not floored, take your parts inventory, and take your blue sky. You have that number in your head, and they go, yeah. I say, is it between 20 and 30 million if it's a single point store? They say, yeah. Now go get me your insurance policy. So I get the insurance policy, and I open up. Most of them have $5 million of umbrella coverage. So I say, okay, do you understand that you're exposed for everything above 5 million if you were somebody to have a catastrophic accident, that the lawyer's going to own your store because you don't have enough insurance to cover a catastrophic accident. So between 5 million and 25 million, you're just exposed, or actually above that, but you're just exposed. And I explain that to them, and most dealers that say to me, nobody's ever said that to me. I didn't understand that, or I probably would have bought more insurance. I said, now's the time to do that. So,
and then that insurance isn't that expensive.
No, usually it's $1,000 per million. So
Mm-hmm.
20 million would be 20,000 a year, or on the upper end, 40, or on the upper end, that 20 million would be $40,000 a year, depending on the underwriting, depending on market conditions and all kinds of other things. But it's not. It's $20,000. Now, some dealers have hubris and say, I don't need it, or I haven't had a problem yet. I call that a case of the yets.
I agree.
And I explained to them that during my time we had, I don't remember, it was 4 or 5 people killed in auto accidents and various things that happened. That it happens, and it's their business. My job is to say, here's what the risk is, here's how you can cover the risk, and then there's an economic choice to be made, and that's dealers are great entrepreneurs, and they make those choices, and they have to live or die by them, as it turns out. So my process is first to do a very thorough analysis of their insurance, suggest other policies. I find dealers don't have enough cyber insurance. Recently, Jeff Weiler just had a breach. Berglund Automotive in Richmond had a breach. Coons up in Northern Virginia had a breach a couple years ago. I understand that was settled for roughly 7 to 8 million. So if dealers don't have cyber insurance, that's something I certainly advocate. And then directors and officers insurance, I advocate for lots of reasons which I can go into. So I plug the holes first and make sure that we have clear communication on why these things are important. Some dealers, quite frankly, Todd, don't understand what's in their policies. So I'll spend half a day at least going through every single line item on the policy and just educating them and say, here's why this is important. Here's why errors and omissions is important. Here's why truth in lending coverage is important. And so if they don't understand what's in there, absolutely, I'll start by the education process, and then we'll develop a plan on how to go forth with their insurance. And then we'll start talking about compliance once all that's kind of buttoned up. There's no reason really to talk about compliance if you don't have the right insurance products in place.
So the first thing is look at the policy that they have, make sure that they have the right amount of coverage, right? And then I'm going to guess, right, or assume that once you do that for the dealer, if the dealer chooses, then he would have you and your company work with them on being proactive rather than reactive when it comes to things that can cause losses in their dealership or dealerships.
Exactly.
And what are some of those things?
Yeah. So the first thing, the very first thing I start off is IRS 8300 compliance, and everybody gasps and says, "We got that handled, right?" I'm talking to a 40 store group. and a 10 store group and a 32 store group. And I can tell by asking in 4 or 5 questions of their cashier whether they're exposed on this issue or not. And the reason I start there is for every missed 8,300, it's up to 250,000 at the discretion of the IRS, and up to 5.5 years of jail time for the dealer for.
Oh, I remember.
So I mean, this it's nothing to mess with. And here's what dealers can do. It's simple and easy on what they need to do. You go to your cashier and you say to your cashier, if I give you a personal check, how do you receipt that in? And she says, well, I go to the drop-down menu and it says check. I say, okay, great. If I have a $10,000 cashier's check, how do you receipt that in? And she says, oh, I go to the check and I use the drop-down to check and I receipt it in. If I have an $8,000 cashier's check, how do you receipt that in? And she goes, oh, well, I just go to the drop-down menu, the same drop-down menu, and I just receipt it in. Well, you've just proven that that there's no way they can be doing it right, because the people in the office can't tell from what was receipted as to whether there's an 8,300 that's necessary or not, right? I mean, if the customer has a $10,000 even cashier's check, the dealership's required to file the form. If you have an $8,000 cashier's check plus $2,000 cash, the dealership has to file the form.
Yes.
Right? I mean, there's so many iterations there, but if there's no information on the receipt showing what that information is, then clearly nobody is paying attention to it. And so setting up a new system with making sure that that's done properly, retraining the cashiers, retraining the office to make sure they're accounting for it, and then retraining the F&I managers, that's a whole process. And so that's after we talk about how much insurance they have, that's really the second thing that we talk about, because it's not done correctly. And in a recent group I was at, I personally found 10 that should have been sent in, and I stopped after 10. It took me 6 hours. To find 10. Then I stopped and I said,
yeah,
okay, we got a problem. Let's fix the problem. How do you want to handle it from here?
What else do you see other than 8,300s? Like what else do you do? I mean, we talk about 8,300s, but let's go by department, right? Let's talk about variable ops first, and then fixed ops second, right? Like, so what do you do for variable ops as far as quote unquote compliance?
Yeah. So if the dealer or the dealer group, the executive team has a specific issue, obviously I'll delve into that. But short of that, I'll really start on FTC buyer's guides. And the reason that I start on those, again, everybody thinks they're correct. Nobody is filling them out correctly. And the reason I start there is also because for every violation, the FTC can fine $51,744 per violation. It's per violation. Yep. It's insane, right? It's crazy. So if you have 10 of them, is that 500,000 or is it 51,000? Well, it's left open so that the FTC has the discretion to do whatever they want. But with these new with the June 9th was the deadline for the Gramm-Leach-Bliley safeguards update. If the FTC comes in for any reason, they're going to look at your GLBA information and they're going to look at your buyer's guides. It's going to be the first thing they look at. So I want to make sure that that stuff is clear. And here's why it's not, Todd, is because it's a little complicated. The lot attendant or lot porter who's putting that sticker on has to know if there's a remaining warranty on the vehicle. And they have to pay attention to that. Now, how many dealership groups do you think train lot attendants or have a process in place to do that, right?
They don't. And a lot of dealers farm it out too. A lot of dealers farm out getting window stickers done in their cars. A good portion of them do.
That's right.
People don't know.
So how many of them have a process for the farmed out ones to check the Carfax to see if there's a remaining factory warranty? Or do the people filling it out know whether there's a warranty that's available to be sold on the car, right? And all those boxes have to be checked properly. Is there a remaining factory warranty? Or is there a used car warranty? Like Ford's program right now, their Blue Oval program, you can buy, and some dealers put those used vehicle warranties on. That's a separate box on the FTC buyer's guide, right? So you've got that whole side of it. Then your F&I managers, when they're running through their paperwork, they're not checking which boxes should be checked. They don't check the Carfax to see if the car has a warranty, the remaining factory warranty on there, or they're just not doing the detail work. So you have to set up two different processes, one for the lot attendant and one for the F&I manager, and somebody to go back and check behind them to make sure they're doing it right. So you have to set up a compliance team, and that doesn't have to be full-time people. That can be, people who have a couple hours a week to be able to do some work. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's software that you can configure how you want it and who gets to approve it and who's auditing it, and that, however that flow works at your store.
Yeah, when I had my dealerships, we used software from a company called Complete, and they got bought out by KPA.
Right.
And then, and I remember, obviously when I worked at Sonic, for Echo Park as a director, I can't remember the vendor that we used, but most of the dealer groups I work with now, and in some cases I've had to, as a consultant, take some of those classes and as well, because of the fact that I am involved in some things at variable ops. So I'm very familiar with the software that we're talking about. I'm assuming most dealers have it. I think
most dealers don't have a check and balance where information is then uploaded. Like somebody goes to look, takes a picture of it, says, I've checked it, uploaded it, and then somebody can do. That's not happening. And
really?
And there are limitations to some of the softwares you're talking about. I know of others that will do that, and that you can manipulate how you want to.
Yeah.
So that, in my practice, that's something that I'm doing is these new kind of compliance software packages that will allow you to be very flexible. So you don't have to do what their software does. You do it however you want to do it and design it that way.
Are you creating any of your own software, or are you just helping dealers navigate the software that they either have, or helping a dealer decide which software to use?
Correct. I'm software agnostic. I mean, okay. I have my own preferences, clearly.
Yeah.
But whatever it's like their insurance broker. When I'm going to use their insurance broker until they say, and this happens over the years, after a period of years, they say, my guy's not so great, is he? Like, well, there are better guys out there, and but whoever you want to use, it's fine with me.
What about for before we go to fixed ops? I just thought of this, right? So what about for HR stuff like hiring, firing, performance appraisals, training, safety training, like things like that? Are you get involved in that kind of stuff or no?
Yeah, I get involved in most of that stuff. So having proper HR policies is obviously super important, and that will prevent a lot of problems, right? In my practice, I tell dealers that problems come on two legs, either employees or customers. Those are that's where 80% of your problems come from.
Yeah.
So if you're handling your two-legged problems, then you are likely gonna manage most of your risk. There's obviously the other 20% that you have to work on with all the compliance and all the things we're talking about. But handling those issues and making sure there are writing up employees and the employee guidebook. I like to call it a guidebook because I've been in court myself many hundreds of times, I would say. I also do expert witness work.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. So you do that stuff. Okay.
Yeah, I do. And having I was being deposed once, and they said, "Why is it a guidebook?" I said, "Well, this is a document that guides all the employees to what the policies are." And the lawyer, and I don't remember the issue, but the lawyer said, "Well, why isn't this particular policy in there?" And I said, "Because this is a document to guide us. It's not an Encyclopedia Britannica. It's a guidebook, right?" And so the difference between a guidebook and a handbook is handbook has more connotations that all of the things are contained in that little module there, but a guidebook guides. So I like to call it a guidebook. So yeah, I get into reading the guidebooks and suggesting policies and talking about all of those kinds of things.
If you pick 10 dealers, right, how many of them have like an up-to-date handbook, guidebook, whatever you want to call it, that's current with everything in it that should be in it?
2 out of 10.
That's what I was figuring.
Yeah. I mean, it's heavy lifting, right? I mean, it's really heavy lifting to make sure that everything is done properly, and it's up to date. So it's just something that's it's not exciting. None of this stuff that I do is sexy or exciting but it's all vital for the health of the dealership.
Well, especially if you get sued, right? Like, what about performance appraisals, job descriptions, signed pay plans, updates to pay plans, things like that? Like, those are the things that I have an HR. I have an HR degree, believe it or not. I was a car dealer, but I do have an HR degree. It was a very good piece of advice my father gave me a long time ago. He said, "You want to get a degree, get an HR degree." And I'm glad I did. But I find that not with Sonic, right? Because they were public and they were great at this, but some of the dealers that I work with, or even some friends of mine that are dealers, they're not up to date when it comes to anything with HR, pay plans, job description, performance appraisals, or any of that stuff. And I don't understand that. What are your thoughts on that?
First of all, a lack of written pay plan is the first biggest problem that happens, especially in variable. Because somebody's going to say, well, but my pay plan was this, and you're only giving me this, and screw you, and then you have a problem.
And you see people get sued. You read stories in automotive news about it all the time. Lawsuits where dealers lose.
Dealers can't win in court. Dealers can't. Nobody, lawyers, insurance people, and dealers. If you go to court, you're going to lose. It's just that simple. So you better figure out a way to negotiate these things in such a way that you can minimize your damage, right? Risk mitigate, and get the problems handled. And we talked a few minutes ago. Your first loss is absolutely your best loss.
Yeah, I totally
get it done. Get it handled. Yes, it's painful. Yes, it's distasteful. And often, Todd, I hear, but we did. And I'm sure you've heard this too. We did nothing wrong. We didn't do anything wrong. To which my response, in a nice, kind way, I said, look, we're running a business here. You have this problem. We're not a nonprofit company. We're a for-profit company. The best way to handle this is to fix it, pay for it, and move on. If you don't, you're going to spend thousands of dollars a month litigating. I personally, when I was at the dealership on a case, I had a case I spent $80,000 in 1 month. I mean, it's not hard to do. When the cases are complicated. So, I've been to the Supreme Court of Virginia. I've drank the Kool-Aid. I know what it's like to go all the way and take a problem. It's just expensive and it's time consuming.
It's extremely expensive.
It pulls the plow out of the field. Most importantly, you're focusing on lawsuits instead of selling cars and selling service. And so there's very much a hard cost to that people overlook. But dealers feel like they're getting taken advantage of, and in some cases they are, and that's part of running a business, and that's hard for some operators to swallow. And I understand, because it's offensive. It doesn't feel right. It feels terrible. You feel like you're being manipulated, and you are, and all the negativity that goes with that.
One of the things I think is super important that my father taught me at a very, very young age was, document everything, right? He always said, Todd, get a notepad, date, time, conversation, put it in a folder, wherever, right? And this was before, a lot of the technology that we have now. And, but he was right. Like, I can't tell you. And I always taught the people that worked for me as well, like people that were in leadership, any kind of management position, I taught them the same exact thing. And I asked them to teach the people that work underneath them to document everything, because you don't know something that happened 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, a conversation that you had. You should be doing performance appraisals at least twice a year, right? Like, all this stuff has got to be documented, because you never know when you're going to need it. And I can tell you probably a handful of times throughout the time when I owned stores where I went back and I found these notes that I kept, or my managers went back and like, yeah, Todd, you know what? I kept notes like you told me. I'm like, thank God you did, because they really helped. They helped a lot.
Absolutely. And I went to the on behalf of a dealership group. I went to an EEOC, meeting, and based on the documentation, it was very much simple to get the mediator on our side and just say, hey, look, this is a really simple one. Here's the this, and here's the that, and here's the next thing. Things go easy when you have good documentation. When you have poor documentation, it's a tough road to hoe, and it's hard to get things settled because you're the big bad car dealer, and it's always going to be everything's going to be construed against you instead of for you, especially with a customer and especially with a disgruntled employee.
Yeah. So let me ask you another question, right? Like moving towards now fixed ops a little bit, that's the part of the car business where there's more, let's call it physical labor, right? Technicians, people working in parts departments, people doing body work, that sort of thing. You see a lot of things with workers' comp claims, injuries in the workplace. Do you get involved in anything like that or no?
Well, initially, one of the things I asked for an initial document review or loss runs from all the different insurance companies. Mm-hmm. And so I'll review all the loss runs and see if there are any losses and what they are coming from. If it's something like you're talking about in the fixed ops side, then we're going to have to instill some training. We're going to have to instill, some lunch and learns or whatever we have to do to bring everybody kind of up to speed on where we should be. That can be because there's a weak fixed ops director. It could be because it just wasn't part of the culture. It could be for a lot of different reasons. But I think it's important to do that, and we look at the loss runs to see where those losses are coming from again, so we can try to design a solution. A good one that I'm working on right now, actually, with one of my dealer groups, is their rates for their insurance went up because they've had a lot of accidents. And some of these accidents were small numbers. They turned in a $5,000 claim and a $2,000 claim and a $3,000 claim and a $7,000 claim. And with insurance companies, they look for both frequency and severity. That's the two magic words. And so their rates went up. And so we're still not finished with this process, but we're negotiating with the insurance company to say, hey, we're going to give defensive driving classes, make all these people take these defensive driving classes, and we're going to limit their, ability to drive, and the technicians are going to have to go make right-hand turns only and design one of those so they don't have to cross traffic, which is a big problem. That's where a lot of accidents happen, right? So there are ways to mitigate all these kinds of things. You just have to understand what the problem is, and then you can design a solution to answer that.
So if you had to take top 5, like what are the top 5 claims that you're currently seeing right now? So let's take 2022 up until now. Like what are the top 5 things where you're seeing the most losses for dealers?
I see I see a lack of customer satisfaction, I'm going to call it, processes, so that if somebody's disgruntled for whatever the reason is, that there's a process to make sure they're taken care of in any way, shape, or form so that they don't file lawsuits. That's always the biggest thing I see. And a lot of those start with negative reviews, right? If how the dealer is responding to negative reviews, and there's a lot of good services, a lot of bad services, and some dealers, I think the good ones actually do those in-house, where they respond to the internet reviews. And what I advocate is that you have somebody in-house who responds and then picks up the old phone. Remember that old telephone still works.
That's right, it does.
And you call the customer. You get the customer in the store and you satisfy them. The end. Now, that may take 1 meeting, it may take 2 meetings, it may take 3 meetings. It takes as long as it takes. But if you're just responding, and I see this all the time, dear Mr. Customer, we're so sorry you had a bad experience at ABC Chevrolet. If there's anything we can do for you, please let us know. Sincerely, Matilda, Customer Service Manager. Well, the customer just got done telling you what all the problems was. That's why they wrote the complaint. So writing those responses makes you sound deaf,
Yeah,
And
and a lot of times they're just templates or canned responses, or even people that now that are using AI, and
right,
they're not dealing with it. Yeah, I
right,
totally agree. And I think also internally as well, like for employee problems too, I would think probably the same thing, right?
right, absolutely. You should have a process. There should be an open door process. It should be published in your guidebook. Like if your manager's the problem, then you go see their manager or come to the dealer or whatever process you want to
Whistle, like a whistleblower policy in
or
your
a
store.
whistleblower hotline. You can do that.
Yeah.
One of the services I provide for my clients is I have a website called alwaysdobetter.com. And what we do is we put signs at the exits of the stores, and we also put signs on the backs of the bathroom stalls. And it says to our to our customers and team members, if you'd like to share any feedback, we have an anonymous third party who received the feedback and give it to us. So feel free. And it's got a QR code on it. So they shoot the QR code while they're in the bathroom doing their business. They type it up. It comes to me. And then depending on what the group is, I'll send the feedback to whomever, I'm directed to send it to, so they can handle those problems before they come up and before they become internet problems. But for sure, having an outreach to get those customers in instead of just canned responses.
Yeah.
That those canned responses, they piss customers off. And there's, I know of one story in particular of a class action lawsuit. This is actually many years ago before the internet, but class action lawsuit happened with two ladies in church. And they said, did you get screwed by such and such? Yeah, I got screwed. What? And off to the races. You had a class action. So, and that was an expensive one.
What else do you see besides that? Like what other things you see in like common ones?
I see disgruntled employees.
Yeah.
And just like you talked about, again, problems in dealerships come on two legs. So I think that's probably the second one. And a lot of those seem to be communication and misunderstanding. And understand, Todd, in my experience, in my practice, when the regulators come in, whoever that regulator is, and I'll talk about the crazy list of them, it's usually they come in because of upset customers. Upset customers aren't getting handled. And so with the internet now, they're going to find somebody to tell their story to.
Oh, yeah.
And so the attorneys general are getting very much involved. There was a press release last week or the week before last that said the FTC, in concert with the attorneys general, are starting to increase their communication to share information. And so if people are complaining to the FTC and they're complaining to the state AG, they're going to come in. And when they come in again, they're going to look at the things we talked about first. They're first going to find out what your customer problems are and why you're not handling them, because you're required to have a compliance management system in the store, and you're supposed to document all of the customer concerns and how you resolve them. That's supposed to be documented. So they're going to come in and they're going to look for these things.
I would advocate, right, no matter what size your dealership is, it doesn't matter if you've got a small store and you've only got like 30 or 40 employees, or if you're a larger group, or even if you're public, like you've got to have someone that knows about stuff that we're talking about. I see some dealers that they just ignore it, right? They're like, I got insurance for it. That's it. I'll just deal with it when it comes. But I'm always more for being proactive rather than reactive. So I know we talked. Do you have a couple of slides you want to share about the services that you offer? Let's give the audience an idea of what you charge, that sort of thing, if you don't mind, because I want to be able to educate people. We only got about 15 minutes left.
Get it pulled up here. Can you
Here
see
we
that?
go. Yes, I can.
Okay, so I'm only going to go through a few, and my job mostly is to mitigate risk and protect the dealer's wealth. It's really that simple. So,
why the octopus? Like I've been wanting to ask you, right? Like what is with the octopus? I saw you one place you had a suit on with these octopus on it. Like what is this all about? Explain it to me.
So, Todd, what does it feel like to run a dealership? It feels like trying to tuck an octopus into bed, and the tentacles keep flopping all over the place. Right?
It's perfect. Yep, I totally get it. That's actually really smart.
Yep. And so my job as the risk guy is to come in and make sure those tentacles are tucked in and tucked in nicely and safely. So one of the I think the important things that dealers don't know from an educational perspective is Chapter 8 of the U.S. Sentencing of Organizations, the Criminal Code. So this is what the judges are required to consider if criminal charges are being brought against someone. And one of them is the existence of an effective compliance program.
Wow, okay. Just like we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes.
Yep. This is what happens if you have no compliance program. You're just going to get barbecued when they come in. And I don't think it's an if, I think it's a when. This is kind of,
Can you blow that up a little bit or put it in presentation mode? Because I'm having a hard time seeing it on the screen. I want to make sure everybody sees it.
Yeah, let me figure out how to blow it up here.
Or zoom in or something. Just go through it. I want everybody to just be able to see it good.
Hold on 1 second. I got it here. Oh, it made it smaller. Hold on. That's too big. Sorry, Todd. Let's try
there we go.
Okay.
All right, there we go.
So, risk mitigation in a dealership. It's really 8 steps. Identifying risk and compliance obligations, then prioritizing the work by potential catastrophic problems and non-compliance penalties, and then reducing your exposure by building a proactive risk transference program, which means creating your policies and procedures. As you mentioned earlier, you evolve from reactive to proactive to ameliorate your risk. You assign those responsibilities. Through the softwares we've talked about, you can track the progress, protect the dealer personally and the dealership. And then you're going to review routinely review and audit people, processes, policies, and technology. That's really, what you should be doing, whether it's with me or not at a dealership.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you tuck the octopus, as it were.
Would an insurance company maybe give me some sort of discount if I used a service like yours or another vendor?
Sure.
You seen that?
Especially we have those conversations, and especially when I can talk to the underwriters and say, look, here's all the work we're doing. We should have the maximum number of what's called schedule credits, which is a subjective measure that underwriters use to price dealership policies. In fact, I had a conversation last week with an insurance company, and they said they wanted to go up. Insurance companies they'll tell you 2 things. If your loss runs stink, they're going to say we need to increase your fees because your loss runs stink. If their book of business stinks and they're not making as much money as they should, they come back to you and they say, well, because we're not making money on our book of business, we have to increase your fees. To which I say, stop. I said, your book of business is, to quote my son, that's an issue, not an ish me.
Yeah, it's your problem.
That's your problem. So I don't even want to hear about that. That is just not important. And he said, well, we've given you the maximum amount of schedule credits. To which I said, well, there's in this particular thing, there's a law in Virginia that says that you can schedule whatever you want without going through insurance filings. Insurance companies have to stick with insurance filings, and that's how they base their prices. But this law says that they don't have to. So I gave him that law and I said, go back to underwriting, try again, because you're going to make me shop you, and I don't want to shop you. I'd rather renew with you, but at these numbers, you're going to make me shop you. So
interesting.
This is my job, preventing unintended consequences, right?
Yeah.
I have a slide for what you talked about before, but this is an actual picture of a dealer during an insurance renewal. So I mentioned the deep dive on insurance. I'm about 5'10", and so this is one of my clients. I spreadsheeted all the quotes, and you can see this is whatever 4 feet by 3 feet. I mean, this requires very much some pick and axe work.
And that's why it's 60 days, right? Like it's not 6 days, it's not 30 days. This is a long process.
Exactly.
If you want to do it right. I agree.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
This is a sample of the signs I use for always do better. This is just kind of a sample to get people's attention.
Which I think is a really good idea.
And my clients tell me that I help them sleep better at night. So there's 2 happy octopuses.
So if you would actually put that back up on the screen again one more time and just leave it, because I want anybody that's watching this, I want them to know how to get a hold of you.
Sure.
If you don't mind.
No, of course.
There we go. Yeah, just blow that up just a little bit if you don't mind. I want you to be able to get it, right? That's your cell number, I'm assuming there?
Yes.
Okay. So people can text you, call you?
Correct.
All right. That's good. So, I mean, are you a one-man band? You got multiple people working for you? Tell me about your organization a little bit, and then tell me how you charge for your services so the audience can know that too.
Yeah, so I have support people, but I call myself the lead consultant. So you're going to get me, and it depends on what they want, Todd. So I have a thing called the Octopus Club, which is $1,000 a month. I also call that the Wear Me Out program, is where it starts, and that's inbound phone calls. So there's nothing proactive that I will do unless I'm asked to do something. But that's call me and make sure that, hey, I've got this situation at the dealership. How do I handle? What do I say? How do I handle the insurance company? What do I tell this guy? How do I handle the customer problem? That kind of thing. So I have a reactive model that starts at $1,000, and then
so it's like a retainer for you to pick up the phone or answer a text message or email back for, doesn't really matter how many things or how many minutes.
Correct.
It's like a Verizon Unlimited plan for time.
That's right. It's the Wear Me Out program. That's what I
got
call
you.
it.
Okay.
And then, it goes up from there depending on whether, you want me at your location once a month. And I have a lot of clients who like me to come, and I use a software program to document all the items we're working on. And, some dealership clients, Todd, I'm tracking 250, 300 items. And obviously you can't get to all of them, but we're identifying those problems, and then we're triaging them and then going from there. So, and I can spend a week at the store. I can spend a day at the store. I can come back every month. It's really.
So you charge them by the hour or by the day, I'm guessing?
Mostly by the day.
By the day. Okay.
For expert witness stuff, I charge by the hour, but for the most part, it's by the day. That's how we get the most work done.
Yeah. So before we close up, and I'll put you on the spot a little bit, right? Because this, for everybody watching, like, this was completely unscripted, right? Like,
right.
When we talked about doing this was just, let's just wing it and see what happens. I think that's the best way to do it. Like, what do you see coming down the pipeline? I mean, you're a car dealer forever. You're born and raised in the business like me. What do you see coming in the business in general, right? Like, just the car business in general, number one. And number two, like, where do you think dealers are really going to need to protect themselves going forward, right? Like, do you see it just being the same as it's always been, or do you see some changes coming?
Yeah, I see some changes coming. So it's interesting. I read an article in the Wall Street Journal. I'm actually writing an article on this right now. It'll be published in June. There's been a shift in politics, and as the Republican, and I'm not going to tell you whether I'm a Republican or Democrat, because this is not about my personal beliefs. I'm reporting the news here.
Yeah.
So there's been a shift in the Republican Party to a more populist attitude. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about the head of the FTC, whose name is Lina Khan, Khan. And the article was about what they're calling the Khan, Khan, the conservatives, which are Republicans who are in favor of more regulation, which traditionally has not been the case. traditionally the Republicans have been no regulation and the Democrats have been for regulation, and there's been a very clear divide.
Yeah.
Now that line's getting wavy based on the populist attitude of a lot of the Republicans. And so when you've got Republicans who are now backing the FTC, seems to me the logical thing there is that there's going to be more regulation of all businesses, and car dealers are an easy target because we have so much, it's the second biggest purchase people make. Realtors just got clobbered in that the commission structures of all the realtors just got, clobbered in that. I think it was.
Oh yeah, I read about that.
Yeah. So we're the next thing. And so when the Republicans are starting to line up with the FTC and in concert with the FTC about some of these populist things, I see there more regulation coming down the pike. As for the CARS rule, which is the Combating Automotive Retail Scams, which was originally supposed to go in effect on July 30th this year, NADA filed a lawsuit along with the TADA down in Texas to stop that. And in the meantime, in January, the FTC stayed the implementation, so you don't have to implement it by July 30th. What I think will happen with that case is the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, was put in place, I believe, in 1918, and the purpose of the FTC is to regulate interstate commerce. And so I see there may be some flexibility in what the regulations say. Maybe the NADA can mush it around and change some things, but ultimately I think CARS goes through in some way, shape, or form. If you remember back in 2022, it originally started out as the vehicle shopping rule, and it morphed into the CARS legislation. So I think ultimately that goes through, and that will cause a seismic shift in how we advertise, because all processing fees or dock fees are required to be put in the sales price on the internet. So there's no more MSRP advertising. That MSRP advertising gone unless you're going to absorb the processing fee as the dealer. So I think that becomes a very seismic shift in how dealers are going to have to think about marketing, how they're going to have to consider their advertising. You have to disclose when the customer calls what the price of the vehicle is up front. So I think that's the first of what will be a very different way of selling cars that we've never had to face before. And I think that's the start of it. As long as the the Republican Party is aligning with the FTC, I think that's how it goes.
I completely agree with you 100%. And how you look online and what your VDP looks like is probably going to be a lot different for a lot of dealers, not by choice. They're going to be forced to do it sooner rather than later. Because I think some dealers are being smart, right? They're like, okay, this CARS thing's going to happen in some way, shape, or form, just like you just said.
Right.
I think other dealers are just, well, you know what? I'll just worry about it when it comes, which is how, unfortunately, a lot of car dealers, right? They're gunslingers, right? They just kind of deal with it when it comes.
Absolutely.
But again, be proactive rather than reactive. And I completely agree with you. And then one more question before we close, right? Like, what do you think about the car business in general, right? Like, it's been really, really good last couple of years because of supply and demand and COVID and a lot of laziness and a lot of bad habits and mediocrity, right? Like, my big thing is fear mediocrity. Where do you think the business is going in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, so I read this morning one of the big publics, because of all the glut in EV inventory. The EV inventory I read was up from 37 days to roughly 50 days. And in one of the publics came out and said their grosses were down $300 a copy because of EVs. So I think we haven't had equilibrium yet. We're still trying to have the manufacturers give us enough inventory, but not too much, and not whatever the customers are actually buying versus what they want us to sell, and all those kinds of things. I think that takes another year, maybe two, to find its footing. I think everybody's trying to figure that out, and it keeps swinging from pillar to post. Of course, during COVID, there was no selling going on. It was order taking. And so if you had it, you sold it, and that was that.
Yeah.
But
my biggest concern, and I posted something on LinkedIn about this last week from CNBC, like you look at Starbucks, McDonald's, like these companies are reporting, some significant declines.
correct.
The consumer is pinched, right? Things are really, really, really expensive for people.
Absolutely.
And at some point,
food costs are up 21% from 2022 to 2024. 21%. That's incredible.
I agree. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, if people have jobs, they got to work, and most people still need to get into a car to get to work or to take their kids places and go places. So they're still going to have to buy cars. But I think that people's discretionary income is going to continue to erode. And, I think you might see more trouble with people's credit too. But ultimately, I'm eternally an optimist, right? I think that this is the greatest country in the world, and it's a great business, right? Like that's why you and I can't get away from it. We're sitting here having this conversation today when we probably could be doing other things like golfing or other fun things.
Voting.
But we're hooked on this business. It's a drug, like in the veins. I can't get away from it like you can either. Well, Tom, this has been really, really. We probably could have talked for another hour about this stuff, to be honest with you.
Absolutely.
I'm fascinated by it, and I hope that everybody that was able to watch today, either live when I send this out or at some point in the future, were able to learn something from you. And I know I did. So thanks so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Awesome. Thank you.